The dirt was still fresh. The wind hissed through the gravestones like it was trying to speak what no one else dared to say. I held my daughter's hand. Her fingers were ice. Mine weren't much warmer. Then my phone buzzed. A message from my brother-in-law. Bye. How much did he leave behind? Not a sorry, not a how are you holding up, just that. If you've ever felt betrayed by your own blood in the darkest moment of your life, drop a comment. Where in the world are you listening from? And hit subscribe because what happened next will make you rethink what family even means. Before the cemetery, before the will, before the text that shattered whatever faith I had left. My life was quiet, stable, ordinary in the best kind of way. My name is Julia. I'm 38. I've been a registered nurse at Buffalo General for over a decade. The kind of job that leaves you tired but proud. The kind of job where you come home smelling like antiseptic and cafeteria coffee. Eric, he was the reason I believed in good men. He taught American history at Westfield Middle School and had this dorky habit of quoting Lincoln at breakfast. He'd burn the toast every Sunday, then blame the toaster. Same one we'd had since our wedding. We had one daughter, Grace. She was 10 when it happened. Sharp-eyed, quiet. She always carried a sketchbook everywhere, doodling dragons on the backs of homework sheets. She was Eric's shadow. Where he went, she went. Soccer practice, school concerts, Saturday library trips. They were a team. Sometimes I think she loved him more than she loved me. I was okay with that. We didn't have much, but we had a rhythm. Wednesday was spaghetti night. Fridays were movie marathons. Grace curled up between us with a bowl of buttered popcorn. Even the cold didn't bother me much. Buffalo winters are brutal, but Eric always warmed the car before my shift. He'd scrape my windshield and leave a sticky note. Drive safe. You're someone's whole world. And he meant it. Every word. That's what made what came after so hard. Not just the grief, but the betrayal. You see, I married into a family that seemed kind. His parents were sweet old-school Catholics who mailed birthday cards with $10 bills inside. His younger brother, Dean, was always loud, always laughing, always borrowing tools, and forgetting to return them. He was the best man at our wedding. He toasted us with whiskey and promised to be there forever. But forever ended fast. And when Eric died, that same brother skipped the funeral. No flowers, no call, just a text, asking for money. Back then, I still believed that grief brought families closer. I didn't know yet some people only show up when there's something to take. Some people call that survival. I call it betrayal. The funeral was on a Monday. Gray skies, frozen ground. The kind of cold that sinks into your bones and stays there. I wore Eric's favorite navy scarf, still faintly smelling of his cologne. Grace clutched a crumpled drawing in her mittened hands, a sketch of her and her dad on the soccer field. She didn't speak all morning. We got to the church early. I kept glancing at the doors, expecting Dean to walk in. With his crooked smile and inappropriate jokes. Late maybe, but not absent. He wasn't just Eric's brother. He was his best friend. They grew up chasing each other through cornfields, pulling pranks, fighting over baseball cards. He was supposed to give a eulogy. Instead, nothing. No call, no flowers. Just a silence that echoed louder than the organ music. Kevin's parents sat in the front pew, hands clenched, faces pale. His mom kept whispering, maybe he's stuck in traffic. Maybe there was a delay. But we all knew he wasn't coming. At the cemetery, Grace asked, "Is Uncle Dean sick too?" I blinked. Why would you say that? Because he's not here. Only people who are really sick wouldn't come to say goodbye. I couldn't answer her. After we lowered Eric's casket, I sat in the car alone while everyone moved toward the reception. That's when my phone buzzed. And Dean. For a split second, my chest lifted, hope stupid and stubborn. I opened the message. "Hey, can't make it. Flights were a mess. Also, did Eric ever talk to you about his will? Just curious." No apology, no how are you. Just a question about the money. I didn't respond. I just stared out the window, watching snow settle on fresh soil. My breath fogged the glass. Was that the moment I should have cut him off? Maybe. But I hadn't learned yet some people only grieve when there's something to gain. The second message came 2 days later, this time longer. Sorry again for missing the service. Was traveling for work, couldn't get out of it. Just wondering. Eric mentioned some investments a while back. Do you know what happened to those? Also, did he ever set up anything in both our names? I read it 3 times. He missed the burial, the eulogy, the weeping daughter, but he had time to ask about stocks. I didn't respond, but he didn't stop. 2 more messages followed that week. One about the house, one about splitting things fairly. Fair. Grace and I sat on the floor that Saturday putting together a scrapbook for school favorite family memories. She glued in a photo of Eric with her on his shoulders at the state fair. His smile was huge. So was hers. Then she asked, "Will Uncle Dean take Daddy's chair?" I blinked. "What? You said we have to give stuff away sometimes. Will he take the chair Daddy sat in for movies or the pictures?" My throat tightened. "No, sweetheart, that's not how it works." But the truth was I wasn't sure anymore. Dean had started asking questions like he believed he deserved something. As if Eric had owed him. As if we owed him. I finally replied short and sharp. "Eric left everything to Grace and me. That's all you need to know. He didn't take that well." "Wow, real generous." "I helped him through college, gave him a loan he never repaid. Didn't think you'd shut me out like this." Shut him out? I was barely holding myself together, sleeping in Eric's hoodie, forgetting to eat. And this man, his own brother, wanted to audit the grief. I wanted to scream. Instead, I turned off my phone and crawled into bed with Grace, her breathing soft and steady beside me. I stared at the ceiling for hours, wondering, what exactly did Dean think he was owed? The envelope was thick, cream-colored, formal. It arrived on a Thursday morning, tucked in with the usual mail credit card offers, a flyer for furnace repair. But this one had a law firm's logo on the corner, and Dean had hired a lawyer. The letter inside was dressed in polite language. Informal inquiry, family expectations, potential equitable distribution. But I knew what it meant. He wanted a piece of the house, the life insurance, maybe even the savings account we'd scraped together for Grace's future. I sat at the kitchen table while my tea went cold. Across from me, Grace practiced spelling. She was writing invisible in purple crayon. The irony wasn't lost on me. A few hours later, my phone lit up again. Uncle James, Eric's uncle, Dean's usual ally. "Heard about the insurance payout. Dean says it's substantial. Maybe there's a way to settle things quietly. Avoid making a mess." I nearly dropped the phone. Who told him the amount? There were only 3 people who knew me, our lawyer Thomas and Dean. Apparently quiet meant whisper campaigns. By Saturday, 2 of Eric's cousins had messaged me vague check-ins. Masked concern, thinly veiled curiosity. Grace noticed the shift. "Why is everyone calling all of a sudden?" she asked, hugging her sketchbook to her chest. "I don't know," I said, but I did. That night, after she went to bed, I poured myself a glass of wine and opened the old lockbox Eric kept in his closet. Inside, tax records, warranty receipts, and one sealed envelope. My name, his handwriting. I sat on the bedroom floor, barefoot on cold wood, and read. "Julia, if you're seeing this, I guess the worst happened. I'm sorry I didn't tell you more about the tests. I just didn't want to scare you, but I've made sure everything is protected. The house, the accounts, the life insurance, it's all in your name, and Grace's. Dean's asked me for money before, twice. I said no, but if he tries again after I'm gone, don't give in. He doesn't care about you two. He only shows up for the payout." My breath caught. Eric knew. He saw it coming, and he tried to shield us. The worst part, he was right. It was Sunday afternoon. Rain tapped against the kitchen window, steady, soft like a warning. I was folding laundry in the living room when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Dean stood there in a windbreaker, holding a paper coffee cup. No text, no call. Just showed up. "Didn't think I needed an invitation," he said, stepping inside before I could answer. He didn't even wipe his feet. "I was in the neighborhood. Thought we could talk, face to face." Grace peeked down from the stairs, then disappeared quietly into her room. Dean looked around the house like he was taking inventory. His eyes paused on the bookshelf, then the TV. Finally, on the framed photo of Eric and Grace at her second-grade art show. He picked it up. "I always liked this one. Your girl's growing fast. Eric would have wanted her taken care of." Something in his tone made my stomach twist. I took the photo from his hands and set it back down firmly. "She is taken care of. We're fine." He shrugged. "Could have fooled me. This house is big for just 2 people. Maybe it's time to rebalance a little." Eric would have wanted fairness. I didn't answer. I was afraid of what I might say. He stepped toward the hallway. "Mind if I look around? Haven't seen the upstairs since you renovated." I blocked his path. "Yes, I do mind." His eyes narrowed. "You're being hostile, Jules. This doesn't have to be messy." Before I could reply, a small voice called from above. "Mom." Grace stood at the top of the stairs, clutching her sketchbook. Her face pale, her eyes wide. "Is Uncle Dean here to take Daddy's stuff?" The question sliced the room in half. Dean blinked, momentarily stunned. I wasn't. I was done. "Get out," I said. He opened his mouth. "Now." Dean stared at me for a beat, then left muttering something under his breath about ungrateful widows. When the door slammed shut, I collapsed onto the couch, trembling, furious, done pretending this was just a misunderstanding. Grace walked down slowly and sat beside me. "Are we going to lose the house, Mom?" I looked her in the eyes. "No, baby. He doesn't get to take what he never helped build." That was the moment something hardened inside me. This wasn't grief anymore. This was survival. The house was quiet, too quiet. Grace had finally fallen asleep, but I knew she'd wake again. She'd started having dreams of people taking things of doors that wouldn't lock. I sat in the hallway, legs pulled to my chest, watching the nightlight flicker outside her room. Dean's voice still rang in my head. Eric would have wanted fairness. Fairness? Where was fairness when he missed the funeral? When he texted me about money before the flowers on the grave had wilted? I walked to the bedroom, opened the drawer, pulled out Eric's letter. My fingers shook, but my resolve didn't. Don't let them guilt you, Julia. Grace is your mission now. You're stronger than you know. I read that line over and over until the words burned behind my eyes. Eric had spent his life protecting us from worry, from fear, from men like his own brother. Now it was my turn. I wasn't going to let Grace grow up thinking people like Dean could walk in, take, and still call it love. This wasn't just about inheritance, it was about legacy. Eric's, mine, and Grace's. I looked around our bedroom, the worn-out dresser, the squeaky floorboard near the closet, the picture of our wedding day on the nightstand. And I made a decision. He would not win. Dean had crossed the line. Now I was drawing one of my own. The next morning I called Thomas. He picked up on the second ring. Julia, he said gently, I was expecting this. I need backup, I told him. I'm done playing nice. We met that afternoon at his office downtown. It smelled like leather and paper, old money and sharper minds. He wore a gray sweater and carried that calm confidence that only comes from winning in courtrooms. I handed him Eric's letter. He read it silently, eyes narrowing at the final paragraph. Your father has approached me twice. When he looked up, his expression had changed. We're not just protecting assets now, he said. We're protecting Eric's intention. He pulled out the will, highlighted the key clauses. Sole beneficiary, Julia Mason. Trust for minor child, Grace Mason. No secondary claims permitted. Legally airtight, he confirmed. But emotionally, that's where they'll push hardest. I nodded. They already are. We made a plan. I would invite Dean, Uncle James, and a handful of extended family to a formal clarification meeting. No drama, just facts, just truth. Thomas offered to attend, but I wanted to do it myself. I needed them to see me not the grieving widow, but the woman who was done being walked over. That night I printed everything, the will, the trust documents, Eric's letter. I organized it all in a blue folder, Eric's favorite color. Grace sat beside me at the kitchen table, coloring quietly. She glanced at my stack of papers. Is this for the family meeting? I nodded. She paused, then said, Can I make something for it too? I looked at her curious. What kind of something? She bit her lip, then smiled. I'll show you when it's ready. Part of me wanted to ask, but a bigger part of me trusted her. She was her father's daughter after all. And somehow I had a feeling whatever she was planning would say more than any legal document ever could. The dining room had never felt smaller. Dean sat across from me, arms folded like he owned the place. Uncle James was next to him. Laptop already open, eyes flicking between tabs like he was prepping a spreadsheet. Aunt Marian brought a lemon cake because sugar helps everyone stay civil. It didn't. I stood at the head of the table, blue folder in hand, heart pounding, but my voice didn't shake. I called this meeting, I said, because the questions, the assumptions, the whispering, they stopped today. I placed Eric's letter in the center, then copies of the will, the trust for Grace. All of this is legally binding. Eric made it clear everything goes to me and his daughter. There are no understandings, no verbal promises. He put it in writing. He made it airtight. Dean snorted. He was sick. He wasn't thinking straight. Uncle James jumped in. There's precedent for contesting if we can prove undue influence. I cut him off. Eric wasn't confused. He was protecting his child from people who only show up when there's something to claim. Dean leaned forward. Don't act like I wasn't family. He was my brother. And he was my husband, I said, staring him down, and her father. Right on cue, Grace stepped into the room. She held a rolled-up piece of poster board, walked to the end of the table, and unrolled it with both hands. Everyone fell silent. It was a drawing, a giant invoice, in crayon and marker titled, Bill for Real Love and Support. Each line was brutal in its honesty. Showing up when Daddy died, $0, not provided. Helping Mom when she cried, $0, not provided. Telling me stories when I missed him, $0, not provided. Being real family, priceless, but unpaid. At the bottom, she had written in bold red letters, total owed, $0. No one said a word. Dean's mouth opened, then closed. Uncle James adjusted his glasses. Even Aunt Marian's fork hovered above the lemon cake, forgotten. Grace looked up at me. Can we go now, Mom? I nodded, took her hand, and walked out. We didn't slam the door. We didn't need to. The silence behind us said everything. Dean stood up so fast his chair scraped backwards, screeching against the wood floor. Really, he snapped. You're using a child to guilt us now. I stayed where I was calm, unmoving. She's not guilt-tripping anyone, I said. She's stating facts. And unlike you, she actually showed up. He pointed a trembling finger at the drawing. At least I don't exploit my kid for pity points. Uncle James cleared his throat like he wanted to disappear. Aunt Marion sat stiffly, hands folded on her lap. Dean turned back to me. You think just because Eric wrote some letter you get to rewrite history? My voice was steady. No, Eric wrote it because he saw this coming. He knew you'd try to twist grief into a transaction. Dean's face flushed deep red. He owed me, he spat. I bailed him out in college, paid his rent for a year. He promised if anything ever happened, I'd be taken care of. I took a step closer. And you were. He gave you respect. He made you best man. He called you family, even after you asked him for money twice behind my back. Uncle James looked up sharply. You what? He asked, turning to Dean. Dean froze. I opened the folder again, flipping to Eric's letter, laying it flat on the table. And your father has approached me twice about investment opportunities that were thinly veiled requests for money. I declined politely, but he seemed to think my death would create an opportunity. I let the silence stretch. Dean's eyes darted from the paper to the faces around him. Everyone was reading now. Their expressions shifted from disbelief to discomfort to quiet, dawning shame. You didn't tell me that, Uncle James said, voice low. Dean waved a hand. That's his word. He was stressed. Sick. None of this proves anything. It proves enough, I said. And the law agrees. Thomas reviewed everything twice. The house, the accounts, the trust for Grace, it's all mine. Legally, morally, and by Eric's explicit wishes. Dean slammed his hand down on the table. I'll contest it. You won't win, I said, still calm. I'll go to court. Drag this through the mud. People will know what kind of woman you are. I tilted my head. They already do. And more importantly, so does Grace. That stopped him, because deep down, he knew the truth carried more weight than any courtroom. Aunt Marion reached across the table, placing her hand gently over the invoice Grace had drawn. She's right, she said softly. This isn't about money anymore. It's about decency. And you lost that when you missed your brother's funeral. Uncle James stood up. I won't be part of this anymore, he said flatly, then left without looking back. Dean scoffed, gathered his papers roughly, and moved to the door. Don't think this is over, he warned. I'll find a way. I met his gaze. You already had your way, Dean, and you threw it away. He looked like he might argue, but something in my eyes must have told him this was a fight he'd already lost. The door slammed behind him. I exhaled. Long, heavy, final. Grace emerged from the hallway, still holding her sketchbook. Was that okay? She asked. I knelt beside her, brushing a curl behind her ear. It was perfect, I whispered. Daddy would be so proud of you. Her eyes welled up, but she smiled. We spent the rest of the afternoon taking down the framed letter, replacing it with a new photo. Just the two of us, smiling strong. Dean never contacted us directly again, but over the next few weeks, word spread. Some families sent quiet apologies, some said nothing at all. But the message was clear. The line had been drawn, and I was finally, unapologetically on the right side of it. Over the next few days, the silence was louder than anything Dean could have shouted. Aunt Marion texted me a simple heart emoji. It wasn't much, but it meant she had seen enough to know which side of the line she now stood on. Cousin Mark, who hadn't spoken to me in years, messaged out of the blue, saw what happened. Just want to say, you were brave. Even Uncle James, stoic, stubborn, sent an email the following evening. I was misled. If there's anything I can do to make this right, say the word. It wasn't about sides anymore. It was about people finally recognizing that silence in the face of betrayal was complicity. But Dean wasn't done. On the fourth day after the meeting, an envelope showed up, no return address. Inside, a printed email thread between Dean and someone at a local property law office. The subject line read, Asset Reassessment Inquiry, Marital versus Shared Inheritance. Beneath it, a handwritten note. Thought you might want to know what he's preparing. A friend. I stared at it for a long time, my hands trembling, but not from fear, from clarity. Dean was going to keep pushing, but now he was alone. No more Uncle James backing him, no family pity card, just a desperate man clawing at the edges of something that was never his. I called Thomas. Forward it all to me, he said. If he tries anything, I'll bury him in motions before he can blink. His voice had the precision of a scalpel. You okay? He asked before we hung up. I looked at Grace across the room, lounging in Eric's old hoodie, reading a book with her feet tucked under the blanket. For the first time in weeks, she looked calm. I'm better than okay, I said. I'm ready. That night, Grace knocked on my door. She held her sketchbook to her chest, shy again. "Can I sleep with you tonight?" she asked. "Of course," I said, lifting the blanket. She crawled in beside me, settled her head against my shoulder. We stared at the ceiling in silence until she whispered, "Do you think Daddy saw what we did?" I turned to her, kissed her forehead. "I think he never stopped watching. And I think he's proud of both of us." She smiled with her eyes closed. "I'm glad we didn't give up." I held her a little tighter. We hadn't just protected assets. We had protected legacy, dignity, truth. And as I drifted to sleep, I knew one thing with more certainty than ever. This wasn't just the end of Dean's claim. It was the beginning of our peace. 3 months passed. The house was quieter now, not in a sad way, but in the kind that feels like peace. Grace laughed more. She'd started painting again, not just dragons this time, but little windows of hope. Our backyard in spring, Eric's favorite coffee mug, a picture of me smiling. We were okay. Dean never tried again. Maybe the legal silence from Thomas was loud enough. Or maybe he realized what we already knew. When you betray someone's grief, you lose access to their love forever. I didn't unblock his number. Didn't answer the email he sent weeks later that said nothing of apology and everything about damage control. I didn't need closure. I'd built one myself. Eric's parents visited once a week. Diana brought baked ziti. Robert helped Grace build a birdhouse. They weren't just in-laws anymore. They were ours. Family chosen and proven. One evening, Grace sat beside me on the porch, watching the light fade over the trees. "Do you think it's bad that I don't miss Uncle Dean?" she asked softly. I took her hand. "No, sweetheart. It's okay to let go of people who let go of us first." She nodded quiet, then said, "I think Dad would be happy. We protected what mattered." She was right. We hadn't fought for money. We'd fought for memory, for dignity, for peace. Eric once told me, "You don't owe loyalty to people who break you just because they share your last name." It took me losing him to finally understand what that meant. But now I live it, every day. Have you ever had to walk away from someone you called family just to protect your peace? Drop your story below. And don't forget to subscribe for more true tales like this one. Because healing starts with truth, and truth deserves to be heard.